Energy access is becoming every executive's problem, not just facilities. For years, energy management inside large organizations worked on a fairly simple division of labor. Facilities and operations teams managed power procurement, efficiency programs, and utility relationships. Executives set sustainability targets and reviewed the energy line in the budget. The two functions connected at budget time and stayed largely separate the rest of the year. That division is breaking down, not because of a regulatory change or a strategic decision, but because the underlying assumption it was built on, that power would be available when and where a business needed it, is no longer reliable in a growing number of markets. The time to power problem is moving up the org chart. There's a concept gaining traction among energy advisors and project developers that captures what's happening: time to power. It describes the gap between when a facility is ready to operate and when reliable electricity is actually available at the required scale. For most of the last 20 years, that gap was negligible for most businesses. Electricity was effectively treated as a utility in the pure sense: always on, predictably priced, available on the timeline the business set. Site selection was driven by land cost, labor availability, tax incentives, and logistics. Power was assumed. That assumption is now a source of real project risk. Across multiple sectors, organizations are finding that facilities are permitted, financed, and ready to operate, but firm power isn't available on schedule. In some cases, it arrives in phases, with constraints on how and when it can be used. In others, interconnection queue delays push timelines out by years. The IEA's 2026 electricity outlook identified 750 to 900 gigawatts of projects globally that are effectively waiting on grid access. That backlog doesn't stay in the grid operator's queue. It shows up in project budgets, revenue forecasts, and executive conversations. Where this becomes a strategic problem, the operational implications are clear enough. The strategic ones are what most executive teams haven't fully absorbed. When power availability starts driving site selection decisions, it changes the geography of growth. The regions that were primary development markets for large facilities, Northern Virginia for data centers, the Sun Belt for manufacturing, coastal markets for industrial operations, are precisely the regions where grid constraints are most acute. The next wave of major capital investment is being redirected toward power-rich regions, not because those regions are strategically superior on other dimensions, but because they have available megawatts. That's a significant shift in how growth gets planned. It also changes the risk profile of capital allocation decisions. A project that is assessed on land, labor, and logistics without a rigorous view of power availability and interconnection timeline is carrying undisclosed schedule and cost risk. Gartner has estimated that power shortages will restrict 40% of AI data centers by 2027. The same dynamic is affecting large-scale manufacturing, pharmaceutical production, and any operation with a heavy electrical load. For boards and executive teams, the question is whether they have visibility into that risk before capital is committed. Most don't, because the function that historically owned energy planning wasn't structured to provide that kind of forward-looking strategic input. What changes when energy becomes a board-level topic? The organizations that are managing this most effectively have made a structural shift. Energy access is no longer a procurement and facilities function that reports its results upward. It's an input into strategic planning conversations from the start, including site selection, capital allocation, and market entry decisions. That doesn't require a new department or a significant reorganization. It requires a change in when and how energy considerations enter the decision process. The key questions: what is our power availability in each major operating market? What is our interconnection position? What happens to this capital plan if grid timelines slip? Should be answered before commitments are made, not after. PwC's 2026 corporate governance analysis flagged that boards in energy-intensive sectors are being called to lead transformation, not just oversee it, as power demand and grid constraints converge into a strategic risk category. That's true in energy and utilities, but the same dynamic is arriving in manufacturing, technology, industrial operations, and any sector with significant load growth. The facilities team didn't create this problem and can't solve it alone. Energy access is a strategic constraint now. The executive teams that treat it that way, building it into capital planning and growth conversations from the beginning, are in a different position than those still routing it through the facility's budget process. You've been listening to Sustainability Soundbites by Environment and Energy Leader. For partnership opportunities, please reach out to our team.